right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I think there's about 25 or 28 people waiting to be assigned, but just in the interest of time, good afternoon or morning or whatever time zone you're all joining us from. And thank you for joining our breakout session to really identify and elicit community feedback for critical needs on clinical resources. And this is absolutely intended to be an open discussion, so please ask everyone to ask questions freely, unmute themselves, show themselves on camera if they're comfortable with that. So I'll just, by very brief way of introducing myself, and then ask Alan to do that. This is Steve Seliger, and as you can see from the logo behind me, one of the investigators from the PKD Resource Consortium. And I run the clinical translational core at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, or the Maryland PKD Research Translational Clinical Course site. And I'm happy to have everyone join me today. Alan, if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. So I'm Alan Yu, and I am the Clinical Core Director for the University of Kansas PKD Center.
Lisa is the other member from our clinical core. You want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. I'm Lisa Gay Woodford. I'm a pediatric nephrologist. So this morning's session on childhood PKD was warm, very near and dear to my heart.
Outstanding. Thanks. So hopefully those joining us have had a chance, or at least are aware of our website and affiliated web pages that describe the resources that we have been working to create, have created, and are in the process of creating. And you know, what we're really interested in hearing from, excuse me, from you as our users are, first of all, any opportunities we have to explain, but really to identify what are some of the critical needs from you as our user base, ways that we can improve our resources, either by adding to them or by reorganizing them in a more efficient way, or opportunities to modify and change the way we're doing things. I'm going to actually be taking notes when people speak, so I'll also give Alan and Lisa the opportunity to call on people or to help address questions if they're comfortable with that. So I'll just thank you, Stacy, for letting us know. So this will actually be about 15 minutes or so session. So I'll go ahead and just open it up to anyone who has questions for me, and please, for us, I should say, and please feel free to speak directly, chat, or speak directly into the microphone. Thanks.
Maybe a fire of a question. Hi, sorry, Thomas Wimes here, UC Santa Barbara. I'm not super familiar exactly what the clinical core can and cannot do. For example, if I want to write an R1 grant with a clinical trial component in it, is this something that could be done to test, let's say, a dietary intervention in PKD together with you guys?
Go ahead, Alan. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah. So that's not currently. That's not really the main focus of the clinical core. So the main focus of the clinical core is on well phenotyped clinical cohorts, observational cohorts, and collection of biospecimens from those. Because we have those cohorts, they could potentially be recruited into a trial, but that would be separate from the aims, I would say, of the PKD RRC. Wouldn't you say that, Steve and Lisa?
Yeah, I think that's right. Another way that perhaps our resources could be useful in generating an application would be as if you're interested in looking at preliminary data, you know, on an observational level, if you're interested in specific, for example, biomarkers or clinical characteristics. And the data that I should just note that the data we have is longitudinal. So There are many years of follow-up, in some cases, even a decade of follow-up in selected numbers of participants. So I think that would be sort of one scenario where it could be useful to generate, preliminary data. Certainly, all of us are active in interventional trials in different ways. So again, maybe speaking more outside of the confines of this consortium, would say that we are all active in clinical investigation and interested in collaborating with interested people. But yeah, if that helps.
So Steve, if I could offer a thought, Thomas, I think that Steve makes a very important point. This is a group that follows a large number of patients and patients across the lifespan. But, I would imagine that there are people who want to have sort of initial forays into translational research that may not come from a clinical background. And one of the things that this core could offer is consultative discussions about, how you're, sort of setting things up, how you're thinking about things, because we're all clinicians and clinical investigators. And I think that's, as you were asking the question, I may have seen me smile. I thought, actually, that's probably something that would be real easy for us to put on our website, that, the doctor is open for discussion, that doesn't appear. So that's a really good point, and maybe as Stephen and Alan can discuss this in our clinical group, which happens to meet on Friday.
Good, super. Would there be costs associated, or is this essentially a free service that's all funded by the the NIDDK funding there, or how does that work?
So we don't know, because we haven't done it. You're raising a point, and I was just sort of putting a fine point on it. But I make the point that our monthly meeting is Friday, and wink, wink, wink. I think that maybe that should be an added agenda item to discuss, sort of consultative help to the community as you're thinking, like you are with your, with the really lovely beta hydroxybutyrate study that you're developing, how to sort of think about the nuances, the extension of the conversation that we had in Lisbon.
Right. Thank you, Lisa. Wonderful.
Lisa, I really like that idea. So just to sort of cotton on to that idea. So in our previous 5 years of funding of when we had a P30 at the Kansas Center, one of our core activities was providing consultative activities for folks who wanted to do investigator-initiated trials, develop drugs. And this was a partnership between us, the clinical translational researchers, and also a group we have here that's involved in drug development, former pharma executives. And I thought that this would be a terrific resource. We don't have it now because we didn't find a lot of interest outside of our own KU investigators. And so I'd be interested if there's anyone else around who thinks that this would be useful, because I think that I agree with Lisa that outside of pharma companies, there isn't a lot of expertise in this sort of area, and having a group of people that could come together and help folks who need help with running these types of trials would, I think, be quite valuable.
And particularly, I think, the pilot phase, the sort of the feasibility study. Because, if you wanted, for example, I noted Ben Humphreys, who's an extraordinarily well-funded investigator outside the PKD field, has been attracted to PKD because of the science, but also because there was pilot funding for, as he put it, these ridiculously expensive studies. And so that's another way to bring in, really talented PhD scientists like you, Thomas, and I'm not being gratuitous, to help you move your science along, in this case, moving it along the translational pathway.
Excellent. I can completely concur. Other questions, Dr. Lee? You had your mic off. I wasn't sure if we want to give you an opportunity.
Thanks. I'm Jing Jun from Johnson & Johnson, and actually we are starting rolling out AD-PKD strategy and building the pipeline around this. Just wondering, right, you're talking about PKD community. Is pharma included? What's really the policy and can we really collaborate, right, to get samples and things like that?
I can take a stab at this, and now, Lisa, please speak over me or interrupt if I've mischaracterized anything. The short answer in a word is yes. We collaborate with investigators, whether they are academically affiliated or affiliated with for-profit, institutions. The samples are in our data, and linked clinical data are available. I think one potential distinction that we would just have to make is on issues of intellectual property and materials transfer, but those would obviously be negotiated at the level of the institution. So absolutely. Alan and Lisa, other comments to add to that?
No, I think you characterized it precisely.
And I think, Jason, the other thing is that just like Thomas raised something, and we can may not exist right now, we can take it back because the NIH is, because this is a U mechanism, the NIH is our partner here. I see Susan Mendley is in this chat room, and we can discuss, what are the parameters around which we can collaborate and interact with pharma. I mean, the overall goal is to advance PKD research, and pharma is an important part of that. There may need to be a discussion about specific guidelines, guardrails, but we meet once a month, so maybe we could put that also once again on our agenda. We're going to have to meet all of Friday morning.
Absolutely, and then just likewise, the main point of interaction in terms of requesting resources, whether someone is from industry or academics or nonprofit, would be through our website, and there's a specific form that would sort of start the conversation, and we just ask that people utilize that mechanism because it's also a way for us to be able to track, again, who our users are and to make sure that we're meeting their needs and so forth. So great. Other questions, comments?
While folks are thinking of questions, maybe I could sort of comment on something you mentioned earlier, Stephen, about data mining. So that one of the ideas behind these cohorts is that we have data available that can be mined. So Thomas's question about dietary interventions. So many people may want to do an observational data mining study to begin with, just to look for evidence that certain, for example, dietary habits might be more associated with progression. And so on the one hand, we can retrospectively go back and look at that data to the extent that it was collected, and to the extent that it's not collected, it's certainly potentially entertainable that we might consider adding things to our cohort, like a dietary questionnaire. That would have to be something that would be discussed and negotiated. But the whole point of these cohorts is that the phenotyping should evolve over time.
Absolutely, yeah, I would second that from Alan, and particularly where, if we're talking about additional data collection through non-invasive means, questionnaires, then that becomes, even especially favorable or feasible. Just to point out that, these are the data that we are combining together have been collected over many years, including before the foundation of this consortium. So there will be some differences in terms of very specific elements of phenotyping between our three sites. But what we're building and hopefully ready to show soon is that within our combined database, that there's a lot of very key elements of phenotyping that are common and robust throughout all the participating sites of our consortium. So, yep. Other comments, thoughts, suggestions, questions?
Well, since one of our main pushes now is to promote our pediatric part of things, and I see Max Lieber's on here. Max, do you want to comment on any lessons learned from what you've done that you think might be useful for us to implement or learn in the way we develop our cohorts?
Well, I learned it from Lisa. So no. So what?
But you guys are so much more successful than we are on this side of the pond.
Thank you. No, I think for ARP, so let's differentiate between the ARPKD and the ADPKD thing. So for ARPKD, our initial goal was that we said, okay, there may be a lot of information hiding somewhere, and you know, with the timing at that point, we thought would give us the chance to really also identify maybe novel aspects, which until now we have not yet found. I mean, we haven't found something completely unexpected. So we're looking at the main phenotypes. There was this question about pancreas earlier this morning, and you know, there are a few cases maybe, but it's not very striking. So for ARPKD, we had a much more detailed questionnaire at the very beginning, also asking about more laboratory values, because we were thinking, okay, you know, the picture was less clear. Obviously for ADPKD, we kept it smaller, because you know, there's not much point in getting all the laboratory values in pediatric ADPKD. It just doesn't make sense, and there are much more patients, and you want the centers to have the chance to fill in that data set, so you don't want to, you know, overload them with work. So I think that was a key thing, finding that right balance between, you know, depth of data and the chance to really find associations. And we, for ARPKD, as you've seen, we very much put a strong focus on the perinatal period and are much more detailed in that area, pre and perinatal data, than later on. So that may just be worth thinking or spending some time when setting up these studies. That's probably a lesson we've learned.
I just would want to punctuate Max's point. We've had that conversation. You know, you can have ADPKD studies where you have PKD centers that are amassing lots and lots of patients. You know, in Cologne, in DC, and other places, you know, yeah, you can have 20 or 30 ARPKD patients, but you can't have 300 because it's just so much less common. I think that the touchstone, and Max has been such an incredible partner in this regard, as has Jalila, is that these databases are all harmonized. And I would say that because of the way we have to do things in the United States, for the childhood ADPKD, we are a subset of Jalila and Max's database because they ask for more data than we can get from the typical pediatric nephrology department. And I think the catchword, just for the few folks that are on and asking about the level of detail in the adult databases versus the childhood, is that and Max and I have discussed this a lot, is, you know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, collecting data and having individual children represented in the data set is more important than moving you from 90% information to asymptotically approaching 100% of information.
Yeah, I fully agree. And then maybe one more thing that came to my mind was that we've also, and that's something that we've learned from previous studies here in Europe, we've spent some time on predefining reference ranges and, you know, predefining conditions that just could not be entered because it was just clinically impossible. So you cannot save a data set in our registry where the kid would have undergone bilateral nephrectomy and would not do dialysis and would not have been transplanted because it's just not compatible with life. And there we because obviously then going through the data sets again and again and data cleaning takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, and also experience, also the clinical experience, to see what can be true or what just doesn't make sense. And with many centers contributing, that's also something just to keep in mind and where we spend a lot of efforts on.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And certainly, I can now in Maryland, we're only enrolling adults. We don't have don't interact with the pediatric PKD patients in a substantial way. But certainly, it is for adult participants. It is a very long visit, and you can definitely even in mature adults, you can run into fatigue. And so we understand. We're trying to identify those variables, those characteristics that are really thought to be core and absolutely needed, and others that could be considered optional if it's feasible to collect it. And that would be across the age span too, since that is one of our goals, is actually to, at least initially, even our initial focus on ADPKD is to have information on patients throughout the lifespan.
And that may be another aspect. So as Lisa, as you said, we've harmonized the questionnaires. We've also tried to harmonize them here in Cologne with Roman Müller, who has set up a huge ADPKD cohort by now with I guess 1,000 patients recruited. So and with the aim to get to that point where we get the lifespan, that the data can be comparable between the pediatric and the adult.
And I think one of the things that we have had a lot of discussions about, and I think CKID came to our rescue with the development of the U25 GFR formula. I mean, the Schwartz formula just doesn't translate probably much beyond the middle of adolescence. And as we heard today from Jalila, it overestimates GFR. And so you overestimate hyperfiltration, which is a harbinger, we know in pediatrics and I'm sure in adult medicine, is a harbinger of bad things to come. And so having a more accurate, kind of representation, number one, and number two, having a formula that you can calculate the eGFR in a 16-year-old and calculate the eGFR in a 24-year-old is really, really important. And so as we sort of try to marry up these databases, I personally think, and I'd love your thoughts, Max, that sort of maybe between 14 and 24, pick some window that however we calculate eGFR, and I think in pediatrics we are now moving en masse to the U25 formula here, at least here in the States. But that the young adults get their eGFR calculated using that formula because it's robust, I think, to 25, right? That's why it's a U25 is the designation.
I think we have included 3 or 4 different formulas in our databases, just that run all the time, to try to be, we try to be prepared for these questions. Especially for the first year of life, there's again a very challenging situation because none of these is validated. We usually take the bedside ward, but then we don't really know, so we're trying to work in that age range, just with also with creatinine values that may be helpful.
And we've tried to do a similar, or are taking a similar approach where we show different estimate equations. One, depending, would be appropriate for childhood or childhood early adulthood, and then only adulthood. and then also provide the inputs, the creatinine and the other factors that others can use then to calculate GFR, even according to other equations that might be introduced into the future.
So briefly, can I ask a question of the audience here?
Go for it.
So I know we don't have much time, but one thing that we didn't address is what types of biospecimens and biosamples people are interested in. So we collect blood and urine, but I'm interested in, are there people who are interested in urine exosomes, in urinary epithelial cells that we heard about today, but we're not collecting at the moment, or even cells that can be used for making pluripotent stem cells? Is there anyone who has any burning interest in those things that we should be considering collecting more of, or collecting if we aren't already? I guess not from this crowd.
just to throw it in the mix, that came up about we do have tissue samples, right, in primary cell cultures from selected patients with the ADPKD. Although, as it was noted, everybody had end-stage kidney disease, at least in the study that Ben Humphreys presented from PKD-RC resources, which raised the question, though, of whether we should be collecting other kinds of controls in normals. So maybe that's just something to think about in the future, since the normals we used were healthy normals, not ESKD normals, or ESKD controls, sorry. Not entirely sure where you get non-cystic ESKD kidneys from, but I'll maybe leave that up to others to consider. All right.
Well, this was a very good
So maybe
discussion.
just one more comment. So we have in Germany set up a consortium, and again, thanks Lisa for supporting it when applying for the grant. So that is called NeoCyst, that follows children with any kind of early onset cystic kidney disease, genetic cystic kidney disease. And within that frame, we've also built up a by now huge and joint biorepository. And I mean, you will all be aware of it, but obviously the crucial part is, the getting the samples and how to, set up the standards for sending them there, etc. Because I mean, this is where the mistakes happen. And again, trying to get to 9. So the approach we chose was trying to get to 90% again of the samples, but getting these in a decent way and making it doable for the centers. So we come back to the same question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. I think we're being asked to join the rest of the symposium, and wish everyone a great afternoon. Thanks everyone for taking part.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.